The rain soaked through my worn coat as I stood outside my son's mansion, staring at the door that had just slammed in my face. Christina's words still echoed in my ears. Bankrupts can't be here. A penniless woman has no place in a millionaire family. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone, scrolling to a number I hadn't called in 15 years. James Parker. The boy whose college tuition I secretly paid when his father couldn't afford it. I had no idea what had become. 3 months earlier, my world had collapsed in the space of 24 hours. Thomas, my husband of 35 years, suffered a massive heart attack while reviewing construction blueprints in his home office. At 68, had always been the picture of health, jogging every morning and eating the salads I packed for his lunch. The paramedics worked on him for 47 minutes, but his heart had simply given out. The funeral was everything Thomas would have wanted. Our son David delivered a beautiful eulogy, his voice breaking as he spoke about his father's dedication to family and business. Christina stood beside him, playing the perfect supportive wife, dabbing her eyes with a silk handkerchief. Friends and colleagues filled the church, sharing stories of Thomas' generosity and work ethic. I felt surrounded by love and support, believing that David and I would lean on each other through this devastating loss. 1 week after we buried Thomas, attorney Benjamin Walsh called me to his downtown office for the reading of the will. I sat in his mahogany-paneled conference room, expecting to learn about our joint assets and plans for the future. David arrived precisely on time, still wearing the black suit from the funeral. He squeezed my hand and whispered that we'd get through this together. Benjamin opened the thick legal folder with the solemnity of a priest conducting mass. His voice was measured and professional as he explained Thomas' final wishes. David would inherit $12 million in clean assets, the family's investment portfolio, Thomas' art collection, the vacation cabin in Colorado, and the beautiful house where David now lived with Christina. I remembered helping them with the down payment 5 years earlier, when Christina insisted they needed something worthy of their status. Then Benjamin turned to me. "Rosalie, Thomas has left you the construction company, Harrison and Associates." My heart lifted. The business Thomas had built from nothing, growing it into one of the most respected construction firms in the county. I knew it was worth millions. Thomas had always said the company was his greatest achievement, aside from our family. But as Benjamin continued reading, my stomach began to knot. The company came with certain obligations. Outstanding contractor payments totaling $230,000, equipment loans of $150,000, tax liens against the business property amounting to $320,000, a line of credit secured by our family home, currently maxed out at $100,000. I stared at the papers, the numbers swimming before my eyes. "I don't understand," I whispered. Thomas never mentioned any of this. Benjamin's expression was carefully neutral, but I caught the flicker of sympathy in his eyes. "Mrs. Harrison, it appears your husband had been managing some financial difficulties with the business for approximately 2 years. He structured the will to protect David's inheritance from any potential business creditors." David shifted uncomfortably in his chair beside me. When I looked at him, expecting to see the same shock I felt, his expression was strangely composed, almost resigned. "David, did you know about this?" I asked. He cleared his throat and avoided my eyes. "Dad mentioned the business was going through a rough patch." "A rough patch?" I could hear my voice rising. "David, I've inherited $800,000 in debt. They're going to take our house. Mom, I'm sure we can figure something out." But something in his tone, something distant and rehearsed, sent ice through my veins. Benjamin finished reading the remaining legal language, explaining that creditors had already been notified and would begin collection procedures immediately. The family home, where Thomas and I had lived for 28 years, was collateral for business loans I'd never known existed. I drove home in a daze, the legal documents scattered across the passenger seat of Thomas' old pickup truck. The house felt cavernous and empty without his presence, but now it felt like a trap. Every room held memories of the life we'd built together, but apparently, Thomas had been lying to me for 2 years. How many nights had he sat in his office, calculating debts and planning to leave them all to me while protecting David's future? That first night alone with the truth, I sat at our kitchen table with a calculator and the stack of bills Benjamin had given me. Thomas had been hiding collection notices, some dating back 18 months. The company's checking account had a balance of $3,000. The debt was real, crushing, and entirely mine. The phone started ringing 2 days later. Contractors demanding payment for work completed months ago. The bank's loan department scheduling a meeting to discuss the house. A tax attorney explaining the lien process. With each call, I understood more clearly what Thomas had done to me. 3 weeks after Thomas' funeral, I gathered my courage and drove to David's house. I needed to believe this was all a misunderstanding, that my son would help me navigate the financial nightmare his father had created. The mansion sat on 2 manicured acres in the city's most exclusive subdivision, its limestone facade gleaming in the afternoon sun. I remembered the pride in David's voice when Head first shown us the house, how Christina had insisted they needed the extra bedrooms for the children she planned to have. David greeted me at the front door with what seemed like genuine warmth. "Mom, come in. You look tired." He led me through the marble foyer into the kitchen, where granite countertops stretched beneath custom cabinetry that probably cost more than most people's cars. He poured coffee into delicate china cups, the same pattern Christina had registered for at their wedding. "How are you holding up?" he asked, settling into the breakfast nook that overlooked their swimming pool. I set down my cup with trembling hands. "David, I need to talk to you about the will, about what your father left me." His expression grew cautious. "What about it? The business debts?" I had no idea Thomas was hiding so much financial trouble. "I'm going to lose the house. David, the creditors are already calling, and I can't possibly pay $800,000. David stared into his coffee. "I know it's difficult, Mom. I was hoping maybe you could help me. Just temporarily, until I can figure out how to sell the business or restructure the debt. You inherited $12 million in clean assets. Maybe you could loan me enough to pay off the house, at least." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. When David finally looked up, something had changed in his face. The warmth had evaporated, replaced by something harder. "Mom, Dad told me about the business problems 2 years ago." My breath caught. "What?" "He called me when things started getting bad. He was worried about protecting the family's financial future." "You knew." The words came out as a whisper. "You knew he was drowning in debt and you said nothing. Dad wanted to shield you from the stress, and he wanted to make sure my family would be secure." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Your family? David, I'm your family too." "Of course you are, but Dad's strategy made sense. The business debt was going to destroy someone's inheritance. At least this way, Christina and I can provide for our children. She's pregnant again, you know." "Congratulations," I said automatically, my mind reeling. "But David, what about me? What am I supposed to do?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe you could downsize. Get a small apartment. File for bankruptcy and start fresh." "Start fresh?" "I'm 67 years old, David. I've never had a career outside helping your father with the business. I don't have 40 years to rebuild my life. Mom, I understand this is hard, but I can't risk my inheritance. Christina's already talking about expanding the house and need college funds for the kids." Before I could respond, I heard the front door open and Christina's voice calling from the foyer. "David? Whose car is in the driveway?" She appeared in the kitchen doorway, still wearing her tennis whites from the country club. Her smile faltered when she saw me. "Oh, Rosalie. I didn't expect to see you here." "Christina, I was just explaining the situation with Mom's inheritance," David said quickly. Christina's expression grew cold. "The business debt situation? David, we discussed this. You can't be expected to pay for Thomas' business failures. I'm not asking David to pay for anything," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm asking for help, a loan that I would pay back." "With what?" Christina's tone was sharp. "Rosalie, you have no income and $800,000 in debt. How exactly would you pay back a loan? I could sell the house, downsize, get a job. At your age? In this economy? Christina shook her head. David, you have your own family to think about. Your father obviously structured his will this way for a reason. I looked at my son, hoping for some sign that he would stand up for me, but he stared at his hands. Mom, maybe Christina's right. Maybe this is Dad's way of encouraging you to start fresh. The betrayal cut so deep I could barely breathe. Start fresh? David, your father left me financially ruined. This isn't encouragement. It's abandonment. That's a bit dramatic, Christina said. Plenty of people your age manage on Social Security. I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady. I helped you buy this house, Christina. When you needed the down payment 5 years ago, I convinced Thomas to give you $200,000 from our savings. That was a gift, she replied coldly. Not a loan. You're right. It was a gift. From someone who cared about your happiness. I looked at David one last time. I'll find another way to handle this. Mom? Wait, David said weakly, but he made no move to follow me as I walked toward the door. Think about it, David, I called back. When you have a chance. But over the following 2 weeks, my calls went unanswered. My text messages received brief, non-committal replies. Through neighborhood gossip, I learned that David had bought Christina a new BMW, a silver convertible she'd been wanting since spring. The same week I'd asked him for help. 2 months after Thomas' death, David called to invite me to his 35th birthday party. I almost declined, but the loneliness in the house had become suffocating. I convinced myself that maybe, in a more relaxed setting, I could make David understand how desperate my situation had become. I spent an hour getting ready, putting on my best dress, which I realized with a pang was nearly 5 years old. My jewelry box yielded a simple pearl necklace Thomas had given me for our 20th anniversary. I wrapped a small gift, a photo album I'd created of David's childhood, since I couldn't afford to buy anything new. The party was already in full swing when I arrived. Valets were parking cars in the circular driveway, and I felt self-conscious handing over the keys to Thomas' old pickup truck. I realized that news of my financial situation had spread through their social circle. Harold, one of Thomas' former business partners, patted my arm sympathetically and asked how I was managing in these difficult times. I'm doing fine, I lied, accepting a glass of wine from a passing server. That's good to hear. These business situations can be so complicated. Thomas was a good man, but he always took on too much risk. I excused myself and found a quiet corner, watching David work the room with easy confidence. He looked happy and relaxed, surrounded by friends celebrating his success. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel proud of the man he'd become, even as my heart ached for the relationship we'd lost. As the evening progressed, I found an opportunity to speak with David privately. I pulled him aside into his study, away from the noise of the party. David, I need to talk to you about the house. The bank scheduled a foreclosure hearing for next month. His face fell. Mom, not tonight. It's my birthday. I know, and I'm sorry, but I've tried everything else. I've spoken to 3 different lawyers, and they all say the same thing. I need to pay off at least the house loan to avoid foreclosure, or I'll lose everything. How much? $100,000. Just for the house. I could worry about the other debts later. David ran his hands through his hair. Mom, that's a lot of money. It's less than what you spent on Christina's new car. Before David could respond, Christina appeared in the doorway. David? Your guests are asking for you. Her eyes narrowed when she saw my earnest expression and David's troubled face. What's going on here? Mom's asking for money again, David said wearily. Again, Christina's voice rose. Rosalie, this is inappropriate. It's David's birthday party. I'm sorry, but I'm running out of time. The foreclosure is not David's responsibility. Christina interrupted. We've been over this. She stepped into the room and closed the door behind her, but her voice carried clearly. Rosalie, I need you to understand something. David has worked very hard to build a successful life. We have 2 children to think about, and another on the way. We can't keep enabling financial irresponsibility. Financial irresponsibility. My voice cracked. Christina. I had no idea about those debts. Thomas hid them from me for 2 years. That's between you and Thomas. But David inherited clean assets for a reason. He's not responsible for cleaning up a failed business. Through the closed door, I could hear the party continuing, but it felt like the walls were closing in. Christina. I helped raise David. I've been part of this family for 35 years. And we're grateful for that. But circumstances change. Maybe it's time for you to accept that and move forward independently. The door opened, and several guests peered in curiously. I realized our voices had grown loud enough to attract attention. Harold stood in the doorway, along with 2 other couples from the party. Christina seized the moment. I was just explaining to Rosalie that we all need to be realistic about financial situations. Sometimes the kindest thing is to encourage independence rather than dependency. Of course, Harold said awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable with the public nature of the conversation. Christina continued, her voice carrying to the growing group of onlookers. It's difficult when family members can't manage their finances responsibly, but enabling that behavior doesn't help anyone in the long run. I felt heat rise in my cheeks as more people gathered. I should go, I whispered to David. Mom. Wait, he said. But his protest was weak and half-hearted. No, Christina's right. This isn't the appropriate time or place. I gathered what remained of my dignity and walked toward the front door, aware of the whispered conversations following in my wake. Harold caught up with me in the foyer. Rosalie, I hope you know that if you need help finding a nice senior apartment complex, I'd be happy to make some recommendations. The kindness in his voice somehow made it worse. I thanked him and escaped into the cool night air, walking quickly to my truck while the valet scrambled to retrieve the keys. The drive home felt endless. When I finally pulled into my driveway, a white envelope was taped to my front door. Inside, an official notice informed me that the foreclosure proceedings would begin in 28 days unless I could pay the full amount owed on the house loan. I sat in my empty kitchen, surrounded by the silence of a life that had imploded in the space of 3 months. 35 years of marriage, 35 years of building a family and a future, and I was utterly alone with debts I couldn't pay and a son who had chosen his wife's comfort over his mother's survival. 1 month after David's birthday party, I had exhausted every option I could imagine. The bank had denied my application for a personal loan, not surprisingly given my lack of income and overwhelming debt. A bankruptcy attorney had explained that I could discharge most of the business debt, but the house was already scheduled for foreclosure, and the process would take months I didn't have. I'd sold most of my jewelry, including my engagement ring and wedding band. The money barely covered 2 weeks of expenses. Piece by piece, I was dismantling the life Thomas and I had built, selling furniture and personal belongings to pay for groceries and utilities. That Tuesday morning, I decided to clean out Thomas' home office. I'd been avoiding the task, partly from grief and partly from fear of what other financial surprises I might discover. The room still smelled faintly of his cologne, and the coffee head drunk while working late into the evening. I started with his desk drawers, finding the usual collection of pens, business cards, and office supplies. The bottom drawer was locked, but I found the key taped underneath the desktop, a hiding place Thomas had used since our early marriage. Inside, I discovered a thick folder labeled Parker Family in Thomas, careful handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened the folder. The first document was a letter dated 15 years earlier, written in the shaky script of someone under enormous stress. Dear Tom, it began. I don't know how to thank you for the scholarship fund that's been set up for James. After Sarah's medical bills, we had nothing left for his college tuition. This anonymous gift has saved his future. The letter was signed by Robert Parker, Thomas, former business partner. I remembered Robert well, a gentle man whose wife Sarah had fought a long battle with ovarian cancer. The medical bills had bankrupted them just as James was finishing high school, despite Robert's insurance coverage. I recalled the conversations Thomas and I had shared about their situation, how Wed wished we could help without damaging Robert's pride. The solution had been my idea. I'd suggested we work with a law firm to set up an anonymous scholarship, something that would appear to come from a foundation rather than from friends. Over 4 years, WED paid Jameis full tuition, room, and board at Northwestern University, where he'd been accepted to study pre-law. The total cost had been $180,000, money WED taken from our savings without a second thought. I found more letters from Robert, each one expressing his gratitude for the anonymous donor who had made his son's education possible. In one letter, he wrote about Jameis' academic achievements, how he'd graduated summa cum laude and been accepted to Northwestern's law school. Another letter described Jameis' first job offer from a prestigious Chicago law firm. The final letter in the folder was dated 8 years ago, just after Robert's death from a heart attack. His wife had been gone for 3 years by then, and James had handled all the funeral arrangements. I remembered attending the service, sitting in the back of the church and watching James deliver a moving eulogy about his father's integrity and work ethic. During the reception, Id wanted to introduce myself properly, to let James know how proud Robert had been of his accomplishments. But something had held me back. Perhaps the knowledge that James still didn't know who had paid for his education, and my reluctance to burden him with that obligation. I sat in Thomas' chair, surrounded by the evidence of a kindness I'd almost forgotten. 15 years ago, WED made a decision to invest in a young man's future, not because we expected anything in return, but because it was the right thing to do. Robert's letters painted a picture of Jameis' gratitude and determination, his recognition that someone had believed in him enough to invest in his education. In the folder's back pocket, I found a business card that made my breath catch. James Parker, Senior Partner, Morrison, Bradley and Associates. The law firm's address was in downtown Chicago, and I recognized the name as one of the most prestigious corporate law firms in the Midwest. I turned on Thomas' old computer and searched for the firm's website. Jameis' profile page showed a confident, successful man in his early 30s, wearing an expensive suit and the kind of smile that suggested he'd achieved everything he'd set out to accomplish. His biography listed his education, his areas of expertise in corporate law, and his partnership in the firm. There was no mention of scholarships or anonymous donors, just the story of a brilliant legal mind who'd worked his way to the top of his profession. The website's news section included a recent article about a major corporate merger James had handled, a deal worth over $200 million. Another article mentioned his work with pro bono clients, suggesting that despite his success, he hadn't forgotten his humble beginnings. I stared at his photograph for a long time, remembering the serious, studious boy who used to visit our house when his father and Thomas worked together. James had always been polite and curious, asking thoughtful questions about the construction business and listening intently when the adults discussed current events. Now he was a senior partner at one of Chicago's most successful law firms, and I was sitting in a house I was about to lose, with debts I couldn't pay and a son who had abandoned me. The irony wasn't lost on me. The boy WED helped anonymously had become more successful than our own child, while David, who had inherited millions, couldn't find it in his heart to help the woman who had raised him. I picked up the business card and stared at the phone number. Calling James would mean admitting that I was the anonymous donor, something that would fundamentally change the nature of our relationship. It would also mean asking for help from someone who owed me nothing, despite what WED done for his education. But as I sat in the growing darkness of Thomas' office, surrounded by the remnants of a financial disaster I hadn't created, I realized I had no choice. Pride was a luxury I could no longer afford. In 27 days, I would lose my home. In James Parker, I had one last hope. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with Jameis' business card, my hands shaking as I dialed the number. A professional receptionist answered on the second ring. Morrison, Bradley and Associates, how may I direct your call? I'd like to speak with James Parker, please. This is Rosalie Harrison calling. May I ask what this is regarding? I took a deep breath. Please tell him it's Mrs. Harrison, Robert Parker's former family friend. One moment, please. The hold music seemed to last forever. I rehearsed what I would say, how I would explain my situation without sounding desperate or manipulative. Then the music stopped, and a warm, confident voice came on the line. Mrs. Harrison, this is James Parker. I can't tell you how wonderful it is to hear from you. His enthusiasm surprised me. James, thank you for taking my call. I wasn't sure you'd remember me. Remember you? Mrs. Harrison. I've been hoping to hear from you for years. How are you? How is Mr. Harrison? Thomas passed away 3 months ago. James. That's actually why I'm calling. Oh, Mrs. Harrison. I'm so sorry for your loss. Mr. Harrison was one of the finest men I ever knew. He and my father built something special together. Thank you. James. I'm calling because I find myself in a difficult situation, and I wasn't sure where else to turn. Of course. What can I do to help? I closed my eyes and forced myself to continue. After Thomas died, I discovered that had left me in a very challenging financial position. The construction business had substantial debts that I knew nothing about. I'm facing foreclosure on my home, and I've exhausted all my other options. There was a pause, and when James spoke again, his voice had taken on a different quality, more serious and professional. Mrs. Harrison, can you tell me more about the nature of these debts? I explained everything. The $800,000 in business obligations, the way Thomas had structured his will to protect David's inheritance, the creditors who were pursuing collection. James listened without interrupting, occasionally asking clarifying questions that revealed his legal expertise. Mrs. Harrison, this is a complex situation, but it's not insurmountable. However, before we discuss solutions, I need to tell you something that I've wanted to say for many years. What's that, James? I know about the scholarship. My heart stopped. You know, Mrs. Harrison, when I became a lawyer, I learned how to research financial transactions. About 10 years ago, I hired a private investigator to trace the source of the anonymous scholarship that paid for my education. The trail led back to you and Mr. Harrison. I felt tears beginning to form. James, we never wanted you to feel obligated. Obligated. His voice was incredulous. Mrs. Harrison, you saved my life. After Mom died and Dad was drowning in medical bills, I thought my dreams of becoming a lawyer were over. I was working at a grocery store, trying to save money for community college. That scholarship didn't just pay for my education. It gave me hope when I had none. Your father was too proud to accept help directly. We just wanted to give you the same opportunities any bright young person deserved. What you gave me was everything. Northwestern Law School, my first job at a major firm, my entire career. It all started with your kindness. I wiped my eyes with a tissue. James, I need you to know that I'm not calling to collect on old favors. I just didn't have anywhere else to turn. Mrs. Harrison, stop right there. You're not collecting on anything. I've been looking for an opportunity to repay what you did for me. This is that opportunity. James, you don't understand the scope of the problem. I owe $800,000, and I have virtually no income. Mrs. Harrison, let me tell you about my current situation. I'm a senior partner at one of Chicago's most successful law firms. My net worth is approximately $50 million. $800,000 is an amount I can handle without affecting my lifestyle in any meaningful way. I sat in stunned silence. $50 million. The boy Wed helped through college had become wealthier than my family had ever dreamed of being. But more than that, James continued, I want you to know that I am very familiar with your son David's situation. You know David, we were in law school together at Northwestern. David and I graduated the same year, though we traveled in different circles. Through professional networks, I'm well aware of his recent inheritance. I didn't know you two knew each other. James' voice took on a harder edge. Mrs. Harrison, what I'm about to say may be difficult to hear, but David has been quite vocal about his inheritance at legal networking events. Has also been equally vocal about your financial situation, and not in a way that reflects well on his character. What do you mean? Has been portraying himself as a victim of his father's poor business decisions, suggesting that he's protecting his family's future by refusing to help you. Several colleagues have expressed privately that they find his attitude troubling. The betrayal cut even deeper than it imagined. Not only had David refused to help me, but had been publicly justifying his decision to their professional peers. James, I had no idea. Mrs. Harrison, let me be very clear about something. What you and Mr. Harrison did for me created a ripple effect that changed not just my life, but the lives of everyone I've been able to help since then. I've used my success to establish a foundation that provides scholarships to deserving students. I've represented pro bono clients who couldn't afford legal representation. I've created jobs and opportunities for dozens of young lawyers. James, you would have succeeded regardless. You were always brilliant. Maybe, but I might have taken a very different path. Working at that grocery store, watching my father struggle with medical bills, I was beginning to believe that success was only for people born into the right families. Your scholarship taught me that sometimes good people invest in potential because it's the right thing to do. I was crying freely now, overwhelmed by his words and the sudden shift in my circumstances. Mrs. Harrison, here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow morning, I'm flying down from Chicago. I'll handle all your debts immediately, and we'll discuss a long-term plan for your financial security. But first, I want to pay a visit to David's house. James, you don't need to involve yourself in family disputes. Mrs. Harrison, this isn't about family disputes. This is about justice. And I think it's time David understood the consequences of his choices. What do you plan to do? I'm going to give him an opportunity to explain his actions publicly, in front of witnesses who can appreciate the full scope of his character. James, I don't want to cause trouble. You're not causing trouble. You're accepting help from someone who owes you everything. Mrs. Harrison, you've spent the last 3 months believing you were alone. You're not alone anymore. I don't know how to thank you. By understanding that this isn't charity, and it's not even repayment. This is family taking care of family. And you've been more family to me than my actual relatives. After we hung up, I sat in my empty house, feeling something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. For the first time since Thomas' death, I wasn't facing the future alone. The boy Wed helped had become a man of extraordinary success and character, and he was coming to stand with me. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in 3 months, knowing that tomorrow would bring justice. The next evening, I was washing dishes when my phone rang. James' voice was calm but charged with energy. Mrs. Harrison, could you look out your front window? I parted the curtains and gasped. 2 black SUVs were parked at the curb, their windows tinted dark. Men in expensive suits stood beside the vehicles, looking like something from a movie. James, what is this? Security, Mrs. Harrison. When you're worth $50 million and about to confront someone publicly, you take precautions. Are you ready? Ready for what? To go see David. I think it's time he met the man he's been talking about at legal conferences. One of the men from the SUVs approached my front door and knocked politely. He introduced himself as Marcus, head of James' security team, and escorted me to the first vehicle. The interior was luxurious leather, with a small bar and television screens. I felt like I was entering a different world. As we drove toward David's neighborhood, I saw more black vehicles falling into formation behind us. How many cars are there? I asked Marcus. 22 vehicles total, ma'am. Mr. Parker wanted to make sure Mr. David Harrison understood the seriousness of this conversation. When we turned into David's exclusive subdivision, the sight was extraordinary. 22 black luxury vehicles, SUVs, sedans, and limousines, created a procession that stretched for 3 blocks. Neighbors were coming out of their houses, pointing and staring. Some were taking pictures with their phones. The vehicles lined up along David Street with military precision, creating an imposing display of wealth and power. I could see Christina's face pressed against their living room window, her expression one of pure terror. James emerged from the lead limousine, and I finally saw the man head become. Tall and confident, wearing a perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than my monthly expenses, he moved with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to commanding respect. But when he smiled at me, I could still see traces of the earnest boy who used to visit our house. Mrs. Harrison, are you ready for this? I think so. James, what exactly are you planning to do? I'm going to give David an opportunity to explain his choices to his neighbors and colleagues. Some of the people in these cars are lawyers I work with. Others are former employees of your husband's company who wanted to pay their respects. A few are business associates who remember your kindness during difficult times. David's front door opened, and he stepped onto his porch, clearly recognizing James despite the years. His face was pale, and his hands shook slightly as he approached us. "James Parker, I didn't expect to see you here." "Hello, David. I think we need to have a conversation." Christina appeared beside David, trying to maintain her composure but clearly rattled by the display of force arrayed in front of her house. "This is a private neighborhood. You can't just bring a motorcade here." "Actually, we can," James replied calmly. "Public streets, and we're conducting legitimate business." By now, a substantial crowd had gathered. Neighbors from throughout the subdivision, drawn by the spectacle, clustered in small groups along the sidewalk. I recognized several faces from David's birthday party, including Harold, who looked deeply uncomfortable. "David," James said, his voice carrying clearly in the evening air. "I'm here because of how you've been treating your mother." "This is a family matter," David replied weakly. "Is it? Because you've made it quite public at legal networking events. Several colleagues have shared your complaints about being burdened with your father's poor business decisions." Christina stepped forward aggressively. "We don't owe anyone explanations about our financial decisions." "You're absolutely right," James agreed. "But you do owe explanations for your cruelty." He turned to address the growing crowd of onlookers. 3 months ago, this woman lost her husband of 35 years. She discovered that had left her with overwhelming business debts while protecting their son's inheritance. When she asked for help avoiding foreclosure, she was told that bankrupts have no place in millionaire families. Several neighbors shifted uncomfortably. I could see the recognition in their eyes as they remembered David's birthday party and Christina's public humiliation of me. "What you may not know," James continued, "is that 15 years ago Mrs. Harrison and her husband paid for my entire college education, $180,000, given anonymously, because they believed a young man deserved an opportunity. They never asked for recognition, never expected repayment, never sought credit for their generosity." Harold stepped forward from the crowd. "Rosalie, is that true?" I nodded, feeling tears in my eyes. James' voice grew stronger. "Hello, I'm delighted to assist you with our voice services. Choose a voice that resonates with you, and let's begin our creative audio journey together." A business partner whose company Thomas had supported during the recession. A young lawyer from James' firm whose law school debt James had paid off, inspired by what we'd done for him. David's face grew redder with each testimony. "This is harassment," he said desperately. "No," said Harold firmly. "This is accountability." James looked directly at David. "Your mother is facing foreclosure in 26 days. You inherited $12 million in clean assets. You've purchased a new car for your wife, worth more than the amount needed to save your mother's home. My inheritance comes with responsibilities." David protested. "Yes, it does. The first responsibility is to honor the people who made your comfortable life possible." Christina made one final attempt to control the situation. "This is ridiculous." Rosalie chose to marry Thomas, knowing the risks of his business. "Actually," James said quietly, "she had no idea about those risks." Thomas hid the business problems for 2 years, specifically to protect David's inheritance from creditors. The crowd fell silent. I could see the shock on several faces as the full scope of Thomas' deception became clear. "Your father," James continued, addressing David directly, "made a terrible choice. He chose to protect your financial future at the expense of your mother's security. Now you have the opportunity to correct that injustice. The question is whether you have the character to do it." David looked around at the assembled crowd, at the neighbors who would be his social circle for years to come, at the business associates who could affect his professional reputation. For the first time in months, I saw something that looked like shame in my son's face. "James," he said quietly, "could we discuss this privately?" "No," James replied firmly. "Mrs. Harrison's humiliation was public. Your redemption should be public too. What do you want me to do?" "I want you to acknowledge that your mother deserves better than the treatment she's received from your family." I want you to commit publicly to helping her avoid foreclosure, and I want you to apologize for the cruel things you've said about her in professional settings." The silence stretched for long moments. Finally, David looked at me, and for the first time since Thomas' death, I saw my son instead of a stranger. "Mom, I'm sorry. I've been selfish and cruel, and am ashamed of how I've treated you." "David." "No, let me finish. James is right. Dad put me in an impossible position, but I chose the coward's way out. I should have shared my inheritance with you from the beginning." Christina started to protest, but David held up his hand. "Christina, this is my decision. My mother raised me to be better than this." He turned to the crowd. "I'll pay off all my mother's debts, and I'll make sure she has a secure place to live for the rest of her life." It should have happened 3 months ago. The gathered neighbors began to applaud, and I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. But James wasn't finished. "David, that's a good start. But Mrs. Harrison deserves more than just financial security. She deserves respect, dignity, and a meaningful role in your family." "You're right. Mom, I hope you can forgive me." I walked over to my son and embraced him for the first time since Thomas' funeral. "David, we all make mistakes. The important thing is learning from them." As the crowd began to disperse, James approached me with a smile. "Mrs. Harrison, there's one more thing we need to discuss. But that conversation should happen tomorrow, in a more appropriate setting." 2 weeks later, I sat in James' Chicago law office, still marveling at how dramatically my life had changed. The mahogany-paneled conference room overlooked the city skyline, and I felt a profound sense of peace for the first time since Thomas' death. "Mrs. Harrison," James began, opening a thick folder on the polished table. "David has followed through on his commitments. All your debts have been paid, and he's purchased a beautiful townhouse for you in a wonderful neighborhood. I still can't believe how generous he's been since that evening. Shame can be a powerful motivator for positive change. But I asked you here because I have a proposal that goes beyond just securing your financial future." James slid a set of documents across the table. "I'm establishing a foundation in your husband's name, the Thomas Harrison Educational Foundation. The initial endowment will be $2 million. I stared at the papers in amazement. "James, this is too much." "Actually, it's exactly right. Mrs. Harrison, I want you to serve as the foundation's director. The position comes with an annual salary of $80,000, plus full benefits. Your job will be to identify deserving students from working-class families and provide them with the same opportunity you gave me." Tears filled my eyes. "James, I don't know anything about running a foundation. You know everything that matters. You understand the difference between charity and investment in human potential. You recognize character and determination. Most importantly, you understand that sometimes the greatest gifts are given without expectation of return." He opened another folder. "I've already identified our first scholarship recipient, Maria Santos, whose father was killed in a construction accident 6 months ago. She's been accepted to 3 universities but can't afford tuition. Her teachers describe her as brilliant and determined, exactly the kind of person your foundation should support." "How did you find her?" "Through my pro bono work. Her mother came to me for help with workers' compensation claims. When I learned about Mariah's situation, I knew she was perfect for what we're trying to accomplish. I studied Mariah's application materials, honor roll grades, volunteer work at a homeless shelter, essays that demonstrated both intelligence and compassion. She reminded me of James at the same age, hungry for opportunity and willing to work for it." "She's perfect," I agreed. Over the following hour, James outlined the foundation's structure and goals. Beyond providing scholarships, we would mentor recipients throughout their college years, helping them navigate the challenges of higher education. We would also partner with other organizations to identify students who might otherwise fall through the cracks. "Mrs. Harrison, this foundation isn't just about individual scholarships, it's about creating a ripple effect of opportunity. Every student we help will go on to help others, just as I've been able to do." "What about David? How is he adjusting to everything that's happened?" James smiled. Actually, has been asking if he can contribute to the foundation. I think the public accountability he faced has genuinely changed his perspective on family obligations. And Christina left him 2 days after our confrontation. Apparently, the social embarrassment was too much for her to handle. She filed for divorce and moved back to her parents' house. I felt a pang of sadness for David's pain, even after everything that had happened. How is he coping? Better than you might expect. Has been spending time with his children, focusing on being a better father than he was a son. Has also started volunteering with a financial literacy program for seniors. That's wonderful to hear. David asked me to tell you that he understands if you need time to rebuild your relationship with him. Has committed to proving that has learned from his mistakes. I thought about my son, the man who had betrayed me so completely and then found the courage to acknowledge his failures publicly. James, I think people deserve second chances when they're genuinely remorseful. I agree. And I think David is genuinely committed to being better. 6 months later, I stood at the podium in a hotel ballroom, looking out at the first annual Thomas Harrison Foundation scholarship ceremony. Maria Santos sat in the front row with her mother, both of them beaming as I prepared to present the check that would fund Maria's engineering degree. 15 years ago, I began, my husband and I made a decision to invest in a young man's education. We never expected recognition or repayment. We simply believed that everyone deserves an opportunity to succeed. In the audience, James sat with several colleagues from his law firm, including 2 younger lawyers whose law school debts he had paid in full. David was there too, with his children, looking proud and engaged in a way I hadn't seen since before his marriage to Christina. That investment created a ripple effect that changed not just one life, but dozens of lives. Today, we continue that tradition with Maria Santos, a young woman whose determination and character remind us why education is the greatest gift we can give. As I handed Maria the scholarship check, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. Thomas' betrayal had nearly destroyed me, but it had also revealed the true character of everyone in my life. David had failed me initially but found the courage to make amends. James had honored a debt that existed only in his heart, using his success to create opportunities for others. After the ceremony, I joined James for dinner at his favorite restaurant. Mrs. Harrison, how does it feel to have your life's work focused on giving rather than just surviving? It feels like coming home, I said honestly. For months, I was consumed with my own problems, my own needs. Now I wake up every day thinking about how to help deserving students achieve their dreams. Your husband would be proud. I think he would. Despite his mistakes at the end, Thomas was fundamentally a good man who believed in hard work and helping others. James raised his wine glass. To Thomas Harrison, whose legacy will live on through the students we help. And to second chances, I added, for all of us. As I drove home that evening to my comfortable townhouse, I reflected on the lessons this experience had taught me. Money, I'd learned, is temporary. Inheritance can be lost, debts can multiply, and financial security can evaporate overnight. But the relationships we build through kindness and generosity create bonds that endure. The boy wed helped anonymously had become my salvation in the darkest period of my life. Not because he owed me anything, but because genuine kindness creates genuine loyalty. David's inheritance had made him temporarily wealthy, but my investment in James' character had created lasting wealth for dozens of people. I also learned that betrayal, while painful, can reveal truths that need to be confronted. Thomas' deception had nearly destroyed me financially, but it had also freed me from illusions about my marriage and my security. David's initial coldness had broken my heart, but his eventual accountability had created an opportunity for him to become a better man. Most importantly, I'd learned that our lowest moments can become the foundation for our greatest contributions. The desperation that drove me to call James had led to the creation of a foundation that would help deserving students for generations. My personal crisis had become a catalyst for positive change in other people's lives. Now, as I work with scholarship recipients and watch them achieve their dreams, I see the truth that James taught me. Kindness is never wasted. Every act of generosity plants seeds that may not bloom for years, but when they do, they create gardens that nourish entire communities. The lesson I want to leave you with is this: invest in people, not just portfolios. Build relationships based on character, not convenience. And remember that the kindness you show today may become the lifeline you need tomorrow. The best inheritance you can leave isn't money in a bank account, it's the example of a life lived with integrity and compassion. Have you ever experienced a situation where an act of kindness came back to help you in an unexpected way? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Please like this video if it touched your heart, subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming adversity, and share this with someone who might need to hear that kindness matters. Thank you for listening to my story. And may you always remember that the love you give away will find its way back to you when you need it most.